Awesome. So we are live, and we are beginning to start this webinar. My name is Darrin Madison. I am the African American Roundtable's democracy organizer. And this is the beginning, right? The very first in our series, our 10-part series called Undoing the Hypocrisy in Our Democracy. And in our first iteration of this series, we are talking about the county board. Why are we talking about the county board in Milwaukee? Because there is an election coming up. We'll talk a little bit more about that once we get the ball rolling. But before that, I'd love to introduce our lovely guest, Ryan Clancy, who can introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Darrin. And I mean, thanks for having me here. And thank you, ART, both for having me here and for the work you do. It really is vital. Yeah, I'm Ryan Clancy. I'm the county supervisor for District 4, which at least right now is part of the new South Side and Bayview. That'll change a little bit come April, but I think we'll talk about redistricting a little bit later on as well. And thanks for having me here.
Yeah, glad to have you. We've worked with you for a few years now, Ryan. We've worked together on a series of projects. One that I am aware of in particular was the work around defunding the sheriff's department. I'm excited to have you here and excited to talk to you about what our county board does and even some of the cool things you've been working on. This presentation is dedicated to talking about the structure, the impacts of the county government, as well as accountability and action. So let's begin to dive in. Awesome. Devin? Awesome. So we have an agenda, right? Our agenda is, at the beginning of this, we'll be defining democracy. From there, we'll introduce folks to the county government, how the county government affects you, who represents you on the county government, how legislation is passed, and then we'll talk about a piece of legislation that has gone through the legislature this past year. And we'll also talk about election updates and action steps. We always end our meetings in any gathering that the roundtable hosts with action steps and an invitation to take an invitation for the community to take action with us. So let's define democracy. We'll start by defining democracy and also the work that and discuss a little bit about the work to how we're redefining democracy, right? Democracy is traditionally defined as a system of government by the whole population or all eligible members of the state, typically through elected representation, right? Art understands that system has failed us, right? Commonly, we elect folks for positions and put them in positions of power, and they don't align with our values, right? Initially they do, but due to a lack of accountability and due to just folks wanting to do what they will with the power that they've gained, our communities end up still hurting. So the work that I do and the rest of the team does at the Roundtable is dedicated to redefining democracy and working on a more transformative democracy. And we define that as a way to build shared political ideology with those who have been marginalized. This process is rooted in equitable, collective decision-making about our futures and it will shape how we fight for our freedom and stability in our communities, right? That takes some intentionality, that takes some real work with community, and it'll also take community taking action alongside us. So we hope that this webinar, alongside the work that we do as an organization, in engaging you and getting you to take action, gets you to help us create a more transformative democracy. So let's talk about county government, right? County government is one of 3 levels of government in our state. At the city, we have the city government, we have the county government, and we have the state government, right? The city government, again, represents the city. County government is regional, and the state government covers the entire state. But the county government in particular is considered an administrative arm of the state because they are required to carry out or enforce certain state laws. For example, counties are required to maintain judicial court records, manage state elections, keep vital statistics on property, right? Dole out birth and death certificates, marriage licenses, and property deeds, and then also enforce and prosecute state criminal laws. Milwaukee County is also in particular required to carry out various state programs, such as our Health and Human Needs Services program. Ryan, do you have anything that you want to say particularly related to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that last part, right? It's the health and human needs. It's putting money where into a safety net and making sure that people can thrive. And I think that's the biggest goal of any county, Milwaukee County specifically.
Oh, I definitely agree with you 100% there. So let's talk about our county's organizational chart, right? At the top of that chart is the electorate, right? That's us. That's everyone who lives in this city. We dictate the work of all of these different folks. We get to decide who represents us, right? From the county executive, right, who manages all these offices on the left, to the county board, who creates legislation that influences all of these offices. And then we have a series of other elected officials that we commonly actually don't really think about, right? Like the comptroller, the county clerk, the county treasurer. We do think a lot about the district attorney, right? Especially in our work, where we understand that as Black and brown folks are prosecuted at an extremely unequitable rate, right? But these are also, we'll likely have a few more sessions, right, that align with the county government throughout the year, where we can learn a little bit more about these other positions. But let's talk about these specific services, right, that the county provides in that left box, right? We have the Department of Aging that supports our seniors. We have our zoo. We have our Behavioral Health Division, which supports families around mental health. And then we also have, again, our House of Corrections, which we'll talk a little bit about later in this presentation too, right? That handles all of the folks who are being incarcerated. And then we have our administrative services. And then also my favorite office, the Office of African American Affairs, which has been doing amazing work to support Black folks throughout Milwaukee County. So I'm passing to Ryan.
Fantastic. So yeah, so the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors, right? And just to underline that last slide, the electorate's on the top, right? It doesn't always feel like that, but the Board of Supervisors is elected by people. We should be doing the people's bidding. Sometimes we don't quite get that right. But we pass resolutions and we pass ordinances. Both of those resolutions are basically, this is something that should happen. It's the will of the board and therefore the will of the people. An ordinance is a permanent law change. It establishes programs and public services for the county, human needs being certainly most important among those. And sometimes when we give too much money to other departments, human needs comes second and shouldn't. Each of us actually represent about 53,000 people. Alders, by comparison, represent fewer people. And we are nonpartisans. We don't have a D or an R or an S or an I next to our names when we run. It's not to say that folks on the board aren't partisan, but we don't represent parties when we're on the board. We approve a $1.3 billion annual budget. It's a budget nearly the size of the city of Milwaukee. But despite all of that rather large budget, pay and benefits to individual county supervisors, as well as our staff and our ability to reach people in terms of our office budgets was slashed in 2014. There was all sorts of politics going into that. And the problem is that means that a lot of folks can't run for these positions because they don't pay a living wage, right? It pays about $27,000 a year. There are no health benefits. I do get a nice parking spot, but that's really about it. And most county supervisors that I know are full-time. They treat it like full-time despite it being essentially part-time pay.
Yeah. Ryan, can you speak a little bit to a little bit more to the, to the dynamics, right, that county supervisors have to deal with, right? Especially because if you think about this job as a 27,000, well, 24,000, I'll give you guys a little bit more cash than you have, $1,000 job, right? What kind of dynamic does that create for the folks who commonly end up in these positions now with the take up? Yeah.
I am super privileged to have a wife who is, brilliant and has a small business and is able to support me in doing this, but I couldn't raise a family on 27 years. I have 5 kids. We went through most of the pandemic without health insurance. Nobody should be in that position. And because they attacked this position specifically, by they, I mean, Chris Abele and Scott Walker and all those folks wanted to concentrate power in executive positions and up on the top rather than county supervisor positions, which are closer to the people. It limits the range of folks that can run for these positions. And that's really unfortunate. Not everybody has the ability to run, although there are a ton of qualified folks out there. So that would require a state law change to fix. But yeah, absolutely. It's limiting and it's frustrating. And for instance, I get 1/3 of one staff person in order to help me conduct my day-to-day business. She is awesome. Shout out to Amelia. But she's also stretched really thin because she has 2 other supervisors whose work she needs to support as well. Alders, on the other hand, get a full-time staffer, and they're able to take calls from constituents. They're able to do a lot of that day-to-day work. It is not an easy job. It's incredibly frustrating. I wouldn't give it up for anything, but that attack did limit people's ability to get representation from within their districts.
Oh, thanks a billion for that. So especially as you think about your county supervisors, everyone, right? Think about the fact that they are sharing 3 county supervisors are sharing 1 staffer. So communicating with them might not be as easy as we want it to be. And that speaks to particularly the state not wanting to limit the power of local government, right? Which, again, we could get all in the weeds about that. But that helps a lot. That helps folks understand that the county has, a lot of struggles that it's navigating, right? So let's keep moving. So how does the county board affect you, right? The county board specifically authors legislation, right? So they create laws or bills or resolutions. Technically laws are, yeah. They create legislation that impacts the following, right? Community issues. Public health, right? How are we responding to COVID? How are folks navigating a few pieces of the public health system? Our juvenile justice system, right? And services, right? When young people are arrested, they're taken, they're more often than not taken to Bell Phillips, right? Which is our county courthouse and detention facility. It's our county, it's where our youth government, not our youth government, our youth court is, and also our detention facility. We also have parks and recreation, right? So all of the amazing public parks that we have in this city, right, are managed by the county. And actually the public parks don't have a real budget, right? So as we think about the conditions in our parks, right, the county is in control of that. And then a few of the other things that that we'll end up talking about, and I'll actually ask Ryan to speak about, is housing, right? And then also our adult corrections, our house of corrections.
Absolutely. And those are, I mean, some of those things are mandated by the state, right? So the state mandates that we run the courts, that we that we have highways and that we take care of those. They mandate a sheriff, although the sheriff is doing extra, much more than what their office would entail. But when we overfund some things, what it means that the things that are not mandated, like the parks, are always on first on the chopping block, right? Because according to the state, we could not spend a single dime on the parks. They don't require us to have parks. They don't give us funding specific to parks. So as a supervisor, it's really important that you not make the massive cuts to the parks that we've seen. I mean, in the last couple decades, we've seen the number of park staff fallen about half, and those are crumbling from the inside. So a lot of what our job is related to the budget, figuring out where the money goes, and not just oiling the squeaky wheels.
For sure. And then, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, right? I know commonly a lot of folks think that transportation, right, public transportation is in the hands of the city, but no, it's in the hands of the county government, right? Our bus system is run by run by our county government, right? So as it relates to improving conditions related to getting to living wage jobs, and folks with disabilities getting to the places that they need to, right? That is in the hands of our county government as well. And our public transportation system is also something that's underfunded.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we need dedicated funding for transit as much as parks and everything else. And it's a rough one, right? If you charge too much for people to ride the bus, they don't ride the bus as often, and because we have fewer fares, there's less money to go into it. So we don't want that to end up into a death spiral like so many other things. But transit is incredibly key. It's really important to the economy and what we're doing, and yet we continue to underfund it, and it doesn't go all the places that we need it to go.
Indeed. Before we go any further, right, I want to make sure that folks who are in the Zoom and folks who are over Facebook Live know that they can ask any question at any moment, and I'll make sure that I get those questions answered through this webinar. All right, let's keep on moving. Oh, is the screen frozen?
I can only see, there we go. Oh. Perfect.
Awesome. Right. So I have a few asks that I'm going to ask you throughout this live, folks. And the first is, take time to look up who represents you, right? We'll take 5 minutes, right? It's 5:23 right now. We'll go into 5:28. But look up who your county supervisor is, and then also toss that number of your county supervisor in the chat. Please take some time.
And I should say too, this is going to give you your current county supervisor. They're your county supervisor until April. You may very well have a different county supervisor or be in a slightly different district as of then because of redistricting.
Indeed. So I made sure that in the live, I got the link in there for folks who are trying to get to it. So as we wait, I can tell you guys about my county supervisor. My county supervisor right now is Priscilla Cox Jones. She serves the 10th district right now, right? So the 10th district as of now stretches from a little bit around Capitol, right? All the way over to Wisconsin Avenue, upward of 27th Street. And then it kind of gets weird on the east side because in the 10th district, we have Brady Street. And then we also have the Brady Street area. And then we also have a piece of downtown around the Bucks Arena. And then most of the way for the 10th district, the eastern end of the district is the highway. And some of the things that my county supervisor has done, which is I'm really proud of her for, is one, she got a park renamed, right? Lindbergh Park, which is named after a Nazi, renamed in honor of one of our community members who actually ran for mayor, correct? Ryan?
Yeah. Lucille Berrien, just a phenomenal activist and organizer. It's so great to see her there.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Supervisor Cox Jones has been a really great addition to the board. I gotta say, she voted for nearly every budget amendment that would have taken money away from the sheriff's office and put that towards human needs. And she took some flack for it. She took some bold votes there, and those are not always popular with my colleagues, but I'm grateful to her votes on those.
Indeed. Thanks for that. And thank you, Priscilla. If you watch this later or if you're watching it now. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about redistricting, right? So every 10 years we go through this process called redistricting, right? And we go through this process called the census, right? And in the census, folks go around your neighborhood, they knock on your door, they try and get some data on you to see who's all living in your house, how many people are there, and then they compile that data, right, nationally to see how many people are living in a city, how many people are living in districts, because districts have to be certain sizes, and cities get certain resources based off their population size. So from that process, right, each level of government has to go through redistricting, right? Because there has to be a certain amount of people in each district. So the maps have to be redrawn, right? So we, as a country, just went through this process. And that means that a lot of the districts that you live in, whether that's the county board, the school board, the city council, the state assembly, the Senate, US Congress, right? Every level, every legislative body, right, is dealing with redistricting. And that means that you will be represented by new people, or you might be represented by the same, whether or not there's an election or not. So that's something to consider as we continue to go through this presentation. And like Ryan said, a lot of folks are going to be in new districts in terms of county supervisors. I know mine is likely to be Willie Johnson, depending on current county supervisor Willie Johnson, depending on how his race turns out. And that'll also take up a huge portion of the folks who live on the Northwest side, which is the population we serve at the Roundtable. But let's keep on moving.
It would be easy to get into the weeds on the redistricting process at any level, especially the county. It was ugly. It's like watching sausage being made. Except we were the sausage, I guess. All of us were.
For sure. And the huge problem with redistricting, before we move any further, is, the public is supposed to be a huge part of that process, right? It should be a huge part of that process. Folks should be able to dictate, the maps and how they're drawn so that they can feel like they're represented, right? And truly represented by the people who serve them. More commonly than not, right, a lot of governments, right, a lot of different levels of government end up going through an um, independent redistricting process where they don't engage the public, right? I don't remember if the county actually engaged the public in their process.
Yeah, so it was fascinating, not to get too much into the weeds, but we put together an independent redistricting committee, which would have heard from the public, but not from us as supervisors, right? We should not be able to pick our own constituents. So it was great that we had that like firm dividing line. The word independent was in that commission. The very first day, a bunch of supervisors showed up in that committee and told them exactly what they wanted the districts to look like. So it was a fraught process, and ultimately, it was one that privileged incumbency. That's the reason why so many of us are running unopposed right now, and it's one that was really tough to break into as an insurgent candidate. So we did the public a decent disservice. The maps did objectively get better in terms of equity somewhat, but some of my colleagues made changes at the end to make them less equitable, but more favoring incumbency. So I'll leave that there. But boy, there are plenty of videos that you can watch of that whole process if you want to bang your head against the desk for several hours.
Oh man. So thanks for that, Ryan, and always thank you for being transparent, right? More commonly than not, folks don't, especially elected officials, don't talk about the problems with the governments that they're a part of, right? At least in terms of their colleagues, because they have to navigate relationships with them. But regardless, what I know about Ryan Clancy is he is you are a transparent person, and you show up in a way where you are also like you're transparent with your colleagues about what you're working on, and like gathering their support, but you're also transparent with the community about how folks have shown up, right, as it relates to their needs.
Well, thank you, Darrin. I appreciate those words. Yeah. Well, with that, why don't we go into how a bill becomes a law?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. So this would have looked different for me even a year or so ago. I've learned a lot in the last year and a half. Generally, the way that legislation is created and passed is that you first come up with an idea, right? So often that comes from me, but it doesn't come from me directly. It comes from me after I've talked to the community, after I've talked to stakeholders. When I see a problem, I want to fix it. If I can fix that with legislation, I'll try to do that. Come from the news, it can come from individuals, from special interests. It can come from the phenomenal work of AART and other advocacy groups who provide the data and really have these conversations in public, and then put it on us as legislators to take that to the next level and take action with it. And often we don't. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So at the county level, ideas can take two different forms. You've got revolutions, which is this is what we're going to do, and you've got ordinance, which is sometimes a more permanent rule or law change. Sometimes the second ones can get contentious. You can still do a ton with resolutions, but actually going in and messing with laws is sometimes a more delicate process. Move on to the next one. So after you have the idea for it, it's introduced in committee usually. So it goes to one of our committees. Could be transportation, personnel, judiciary, intergovernmental relations, economic development, parks, health and human needs, which is what it is now, audit or finance. Only committees take public testimony. So it means that in committee, in front of those 5 or 7 people, members of the public can show up. They can speak. They should be able to speak for longer than they do. Often chairs cut them off after 2 minutes. I just passed legislation through a committee today saying that if a chair is to cut somebody off after several minutes of speech, that they have to apply that same time limit to both sides of the debate, because that's been an issue recently where a chair will privilege one side and not the other. Part of that legislation also says that we will move any item that has people waiting to speak to it to the top of the agenda, so that we don't have what happened with like the right to counsel and other things, where people had to wait 5, 6, 7 hours to then speak for 2 minutes. That is something that's unconscionable and shouldn't happen. long way of saying that only committees take public testimony. And then every committee votes either to recommend to adopt or to reject the legislation. They can also do other things with it, like sending it to the lawyers or sending it back to do other things, or they can amend it, as we'll see later as well. Next slide. So once it passes in or out of committee with public testimony, ideally, with public weigh-in on it, it then goes to the full board, so all 18 of us. There is no public testimony there, but there's often debate between supervisors, and it's usually voted up or down. Again, it can be sent back to committee for further consideration, for the lawyers, things like that, but usually we get a yes or no then. And let's look at the next slide. At this point, if it's voted up by the full board, it goes to the county executive, similar to what it does at the state or federal level with the governor or with the president. The county executive gets veto power. It can then come back to the board and get a veto-proof majority. That almost never happens. It only happened, I think, once or twice on the couple of years that I've been on the board. Next slide. And then you win, right? It doesn't always go like that, though. So let's take a look at the next slide. I'm going to use for an example here of things that can go wrong with good legislation and how it doesn't always go in the same form. About 14 months ago now, I had heard some terrible things, frankly, about the conditions in the jail, and I contacted the sheriff. As it turns out, when I want to get into jail, it's really difficult for me to do so. So it was a month-long process of negotiation with the sheriff. Eventually, I was able to get in there. They showed me the administrative offices. They showed me like where the clothes are kept. They would not show me the cells, and they would not let me speak to people in our care at the jail. That took another 2 months and a lot of negotiation to get back in. I finally did, and I had some conversations with folks in the jail. By the way, while I was there, I saw staff both wearing no masks and wearing masks with white supremacist symbols on them, and that was a whole other thing. But I talked to the people in our care finally, and I asked, other than not being in here, what would you change about this facility? How could we do what we're doing here better? And I heard a lot of big answers about dignity and respect and all that. But I heard from almost everybody a couple of things. One, that it was really expensive on their families to be in there, especially in terms of calling and in terms of communicating with them, because I hadn't fully grasped what the situation was, which was that we had banned visitation to the jail and the House of Corrections almost a decade ago under Sheriff Clark, so that we could squeeze money out of families through video. They call it video visitation. It's not. It's video calling, similar to the Zoom call that we're on now. I also heard from them that the food was aggressively, terribly bad. I taught for MPS for many years. I asked everybody that said that, it was the vast majority of people, how it compared to MPS food, and they said it made MPS look gourmet. I asked the jail if I could see any of those meals or eat with folks. They said no, but the House of Corrections said yes. So I went in and had what was easily the worst meal I've ever eaten. And I've eaten meals ready to eat. I've eaten bugs in exotic locations. There is nothing that compared to how aggressively bad this food was. But during this meal, I talked to folks about what would make it better. I got some ideas on legislation. One was to cap the price of the commissary, right? So the same folks, Aramark, who are serving this just terrible, inedible food, are also running the commissary. They serve bad food in order to make more money in the commissary. So they have a monopoly. It was privatized years ago, also under Sheriff Clark. And it makes the county a lot of money, it makes this private company a lot of money, capitalism at its finest. But what it's doing is making it really difficult for families of the people in our care, because they have to put money on the books for the commissary. They also have to put money on the books for video and voice calling. So if you go to the next slide here, I brought two things to committee. One would have limited the commissary charges for food. That passed, and that is law now, and that's great. I think it provides some harm reduction, some relief to families. The other one was to provide 75 minutes of free calling per week for families. Let's go to the next slide. As it turns out, I went back to the drawing board with that. I talked to more people in our care. I talked to their families who were directly impacted, and I talked to some national nonprofits, and they said, you know what, like 75 minutes a week is nice, but it's not really enough. And as it turns out, if you look at the highlighted section there, it's cheaper to just buy the phone line than it is to pay the, at the time, 21 cents a minute, still 16 cents a minute for phone calls that the county is paying. So if we just bought the lines, we could do it ourselves, and we could provide free calls for everybody in our care for less than the cost of 75 minutes a week. So I amended my own resolution. I went back to the committee, and part of this Worth Rises report pointed out that Milwaukee County families are paying $5.1 million every year just to speak with their loved ones. When the actual cost of those calls, if we were to do it, would be about $600,000, $700,000 a year, even counting the equipment and all that. And that's unconscionable. That's not punishing the folks in our care, who, by the way, are making $0.00 a minute. It's just punishing their families. And the data around this in terms of recidivism rates and how the terrible effects on families, the terrible effects on children in those households and their grades, their attendance, is well documented and really terrible. And we should be, frankly, ashamed of ourselves that we've been doing this for a decade. So next slide.
Before we go further,
yeah,
does folks who are in the chat or over live have any questions as it relates to this particular piece of legislation, or how idea is, goes from the draft phase to committee? Feel free to ask away. I'll give it a few seconds, and if not, I will continue the slides. And if the question ends up coming up, we'll answer it.
Feel free to jump in with it. Yeah, let's go to that next one.
All right, shall we?
There we go. Perfect. So I brought it back to committee, and we had dozens and dozens of people show up and speak to the necessity, both for reducing the commissary prices, which did pass, and the necessity for free calling. And it was incredibly compelling. We did not have a single member of the public show up and say that they didn't want this to happen. We did have one of my colleagues suggest that in terms of getting edible food or being able to speak with their families, that the people in our care should have a bake sale rather than using taxpayer dollars, is what they call it, to fund that. And that was frustrating to hear. But in general, not in general, specifically, everybody who showed up to spoke to this said that it was both urgent that this happen. We heard from families who had spent up to $15,000 just to communicate with their loved ones. And we heard from people who had to choose between paying rent and then letting their kids speak to their incarcerated parent. We should never be putting a parent or kids, for that matter, in that position. It's unconscionable and it's wrong. So it took me 13 months from the beginning of that, where I had the idea, where I brought it back and forth and amended it, where I worked with groups like Expo and the community and Worth Rises and many others. And I finally got a majority for the full board, and I was ecstatic for it. And it went in front of the full board. I think we have a question here, right?
Yep. And so, author, I think we're going to get to your particular question related to if no calling passed.
Oh, we will. Yeah, we'll get there. Spoiler: it's not a happy ending. Let's go to the next slide. So I had my majority, right? I had my 10 votes exactly, and it took so much effort to get there. It was 13 months. It made it through committee. It was recommended for passage by committee. It made it to the full board, which meant that we needed that 18 votes. I needed 10. It got really good coverage, right? The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel profiled people. It was in all the papers. And then there was a moderate amendment, which, rather than saying that this year we will have free calling and free video calling in our facilities, it changed it to a report due in July about the possibility of maybe reducing the cost of these calls at some point in the future, and then a request for information, as if the last 13 months of testimony and compelling data wasn't enough, and then a request for proposals. So it literally added 2 or 3 years onto this process. And I believe that we will get there eventually, but it was incredibly frustrating to have this work derailed by an amendment at the last minute. Sometimes that can happen. A couple of my colleagues did not want to vote against it because it would have been a bad look, but they all gravitated, not all of them, many of them gravitated towards this very moderate amendment, which made it, they could have their cake and eat it too. They could look as though they were being fiscally responsible and basically slow down a process that was incredibly urgent. Because again, we banned visitation and we tried to wring more dollars out of our poorest families. And, you know, based on who's arrested and incarcerated, disproportionately Black and brown families. We just kicked it down the road for a couple of years. So it was frustrating. Let's go to the next slide.
No, let's stay here for one more second.
Okay, sure, yeah.
So, you know, Ryan, you are speaking particularly to, right, like the fact that government is slow, right? It's a slow process in general, right? It took you 13 months to be able to build the narrative and, you know, go through this process of getting this legislation that could benefit families, right? Then from a point where you were near victory, right? Near creating this radical change in favor of especially marginalized families who need this not years from now, but today, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still in a pandemic, right? Families have been struggling with housing insecurity. They've been struggling with ensuring that their children have food, and then also thinking about the other factors, right? From transportation to still navigating disabilities to, you know, being a senior in one of the most deadliest times for seniors, you know, hopefully in my lifetime, because when I'm old, I don't want to have to deal with that. You know, as we talk about this, what are some, you know, this one pathway was this, right? Death by amendment. What are some other ways in which legislation ends up getting held up in our governmental process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a failure to look at the data. It's a failure to talk to their constituents and to talk to stakeholders. And in this case, like many of my colleagues don't talk to people that are incarcerated and don't seek out people and their families, right? And this is something that I didn't do at the first part of my term either. It never occurred to me that I should go and speak to people. I always said, you know, like my door was open, I could seat at my table if you come to me, but guess what? Like some folks literally can't do that. And I saw a problem. I spoke to folks who had a solution. I tried to push it. And often it's like whether it's this amendment or whether it's a lot of really good budget amendments or things like that, my colleagues don't generally come out and say like, I don't like Black or brown families. I don't like the families of folks that were incarcerated. They do it under a lens of fiscal responsibility, right? So this was defeated not by folks standing up and saying, you know, I'm opposed to this, saying like, well, we really want to be leaders on this. We want to do this, but we need to make sure that we're going to slow it down and do it right and basically dot our I's and cross our T's. The problem is that there is a crisis right now. Like right now, families are being ripped apart by this policy. They're being bankrupted, and it is inherently unfair. And we could have stopped that harm almost immediately by passing this. And we chose not to because we didn't, you know, we didn't want to put it out there and do it quickly. The same thing happens with budget amendments. My first budget, I had 15. Second budget, I think I had 22 amendments that would have moved money away from the sheriff's office and towards actual human needs. First year, none of them passed. The second year, we moved $2.4 million. That's still a small part of a very large budget. But there is a handful of people who will never, ever vote yes on those movements because they believe that police keep us safe, and they believe that only police keep us safe. and they somehow are conflating the idea of the sheriff's office and the police. And anytime those come up, the sheriff runs around talking about homicide rates. Sheriff has nothing to do with homicide rates. And it's frustrating. I think a lot of my colleagues are not looking at data. They're instead making their decisions based on fear or based on, propaganda that's many decades old at this point. So yeah, it was frustrating, but it isn't the end for this legislation, and it isn't the end for kind of attacking those root causes.
Indeed. And lastly, we got a follow-up question from author Edmund again. Why don't these politicians listen to their constituents when they are overwhelmingly saying they want things like no cost calling?
Good question, right? So I mean, the public support for this was absolute and overwhelming. And we were swamped with emails and petitions and every single indicator in everybody's district. This wasn't just folks in Bayview, it wasn't just folks in River West. This was all over the county. People said this is a matter of justice, it's a matter of urgency, we need this now. And my colleagues failed to act with the urgency that it deserves. So I don't know. And I would suggest, and maybe we can go to the next slide on this one, that if your representatives are consistently not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that they can be replaced. But on this legislation, I want to stall here for just a second. This isn't the end for this legislation, right? It was slowed down. We will need folks, frankly, to show up in committee and speak to this still being a matter of urgency, probably for the next 2 or 3 years until it happens. Just last week, I was able to virtually attend a conference and give some opinions there. And we saw people from around the country, and these are both electeds at the city and county level. These are employees at the city and county level all over the country who were tackling these significant problems. They're looking at the high cost of incarceration. And it was so good to be surrounded by other people working on these things. But it was also horrifying because I realized that every time a district or a county or a city said, hey, we have one of these really glaring urgent problems, whether it was privatizing their commissary or allowing a monopoly in their jail or not paying the people in their care any money for doing labor and enriching a private corporation, or whether it was banning visitation or whether it was charging folks just to communicate with their family. Every single one of those independently was a super urgent crisis. And the people in this room were kind of gasping and gathering around each other saying, how do we fix that one bad thing in that city or in that county? Milwaukee County does all of those. If I was trying to put together a system that punished and ripped apart the families of people who were incarcerated, it would look exactly like Milwaukee County. And it was both great to be around people who spoke that language and knew that these were problems and that they were urgent, but also really terrifying to know how bad Milwaukee County is at that. Like, a lot of people look at our board and they say, oh, they're very progressive, but you can call yourself a progressive, but if your votes are anything but, it is, I tend to differ with that label. And I'm very, very grateful for the folks who voted against the amendment that kind of gutted this and for the original one, but we just didn't have enough of them. That brings me to the next slide. And that is that every single seat, every 2 years is up for election. So if the people who say that they represent you aren't, if you on this issue or any of the other ones that they actually do are opposed to them, you can replace them, and I would encourage you to do so.
Indeed. So before we go any further, right, than this, right, we got another question from Liz, and she said, how come the police never have to prove how they impact crime, as in cost benefit? The cost benefit they provide to society, right? I especially would love to hear your thoughts on this as it relates to the Sheriff's Department, right? Because we know that the Sheriff's Department is in the purview, it's the law enforcement that is in the purview of the county, and the police department, right? The traditional police department is in the hands of the city's government. Yeah, and then maybe even if you know, we have Devin, who is on the slides. He might want to speak to this too, but no pressure.
I got to shout out Devin, but we'll get to that in a second, right? We know that the data says that the police don't keep us safe, right? We have a ton of evidence at this point to show that that's the worst thing you can spend money on if you want to actually keep people safe, and the massive amount of harm that it does. And yet we've been fed this line for generations now that police keep us safe. The data says differently, and the people of Milwaukee County say differently. Right. So the last 4 years prior to this year, the counties use something called the Balancing Act. And what that does is it says, it's a great website. It says, hey, you're in debt X millions of dollars, whether it's 20 or 60, balance our budget, right? And it gives you sliders and you can move them back and forth. And that lets you realize kind of viscerally that the more we overfund things like law enforcement, the more we have to underfund things like transit and parks. And it's really enlightening. And every single year, the people of Milwaukee County have overwhelmingly said they want fewer dollars to go towards the sheriff, fewer dollars to go towards incarcerating people, fewer dollars to go towards administration, and that they want more dollars to go towards parks and economic development and mental health and all the things that we know actually make us better and safer as a community. So I was so frustrated that we were having this conversation during the last budget that I worked with ART and Devin Anderson specifically to do a book club on We Do This Till We Free Us. Big fan of both this book and Devin. And we put together this book club to talk about those basic premises, right? Marion Cobbett does a phenomenal job of kind of breaking that apart and helping us imagine a world where we actually act on that premise that police don't keep us safe and what it could look like. And the idea was a book club for electeds, where I would sit with my 17 colleagues, we would discuss this. And it was open to all of them. I personally invited all of them and the county executive and a few others. And by and large, they didn't show up. But the residents of Milwaukee County did. And it was such an incredibly insightful and beautiful process. And I am so grateful to Devin for leading that because there was so much great insight there. And Devin, I don't know if you could say a few words about that too.
Yeah, I think to Ryan's point, I think right. Sorry, I'm Devin, membership and coalition manager here at the Roundtable. Wasn't particularly ready for a cameo, but always down to make one. But to the questions at hand, and I think, I'm going to answer the question and also give a shout out to Ryan. To the question at hand, I think one of the reasons police don't ever have to answer any questions about why they deserve X amount of money is simply because policing has been so ingrained, right? And because they've got to hold a monopoly on safety, on what safety looks like, right? And what do I mean by that? They get to, because we overfunded them, we've divested from things that fund human needs. For so many calls, we have to rely on them, right? And if you ask people, I think we did in that book club, or maybe not in another session, if you ask people if they're actually satisfied with what they get, how many times did the police solve their problems, right? Or how many times did police prevent anything? Most people are unsatisfied, right? And so to the point, why don't they have to prove anything? Because they've been around for so long, every breath we've taken, there have been police. That's just the reality for all of us. So it's just deeply ingrained with us. And they have unlimited media exposure and attention. Right, we can think about how many Law and Order shows keep getting picked up for seasons after season. And people are seeing Olivia Benson and Stabler, solve crimes, quote unquote. And so they think that's what policing is. But Ryan does a good job, and we've talked about it as well, that actually most of policing is the ticketing people, right? The stopping of people, the doing the things that if nobody did it, our lives would be totally fine, right? Our lives would be totally fine. And so part of the reason part of the work that has to be done to detangle that and to get into a conversation about actually what do police and sheriffs do is part of the work Ryan did last year by hosting a book club to get people talking about police, not in the context of solely like, you know, they keep us safe, but getting them talking about like the contradictions, the critiques, and the deeply problematic practices of policing.
Absolutely, and it was yeah, it was a frustrating process. So after that great book club, we're seeing some progress, right? I mean, the first budget, not a single dollar was moved away from the sheriff's budget. This last year we had 2.4 million. I will take that as progress, while understanding that we have a lot of work to do, and understanding that my colleagues continue to try to put in a corner and marginalize any voices which don't meet that narrative of, you know, pro unaccountable police, right? Yeah, so the last 4 years we've had the balancing act, and every single year the people in Milwaukee County have said less money for police, more money for actual human needs. This last year we didn't use it. We stopped asking, and I asked the folks in the budget office, what's going on with this? I really like the balancing act. The people in Milwaukee County clearly did too, because we had hundreds, thousands of responses most years, and their answer was, we kept getting the same data year after year. I said, well, right, like that looks to me like consistent data. Like people are saying year after year that we should cut the police budget, cut the sheriff's budget, and invest that into human needs. Instead, we've been doing the opposite, and this year we just decided not to even ask them anymore, and that's a worrying trend. But no, Liz is right. The onus of proof on every other thing that we do at the county is the data behind this? Does this work? And I think that's good, right? We don't just want to do things that feel good. We want to do things that actually work. But when it comes to the sheriff, they are incredibly unaccountable. One of my pieces of legislation 2 budgets ago was anytime a budget is set to be more than $1 million in advance or in excess in terms of overtime, or more than $100,000 just in terms of raw dollars, that they have to come to the finance committee and explain what they did wrong and what they're going to do differently. And that was triggered by the sheriff this last year. The sheriff showed up and said, yeah, we're going to be over budget. We're not going to do anything differently, but we're going to ask you for more money. And the finance committee rejected it, to their credit, twice. Third time we basically gave up. But then during that budget, during the budget for this year, we gave the sheriff's department a 6% increase. So bigger than any other department. During or right after calls for divestment, defunding of the police, we gave them more money, and that's shameful. And that was using their own data that said that they were doing less work, and their work was defined by themselves, getting tickets and evictions, by the way, which they said they were going to continue to do at a astronomically high rate. But you're right, the onus for proving that things work is always on human needs, is never on law enforcement. It's frustrating.
Yeah. So I mean, let's keep on moving, but that itself speaks to why we are having this series, right? A lot of the things we've been discussing speaks to the hypocrisy, right, of the system that is meant to help folks, right? It's clear that the for the budget office to not say, we're good on collecting data, right? Because we have enough, right? Because we are seeing the same thing, right? That's eliminating a process that engages the public because you don't want to do what's right, right? For the sheriff's department to be able to be tremendously overfunded, right? When folks are dealing with when folks are navigating issues with paratransit, right, which is our disability transportation service, when folks are navigating issues with our county transportation system, right, our bus system, because our bus lines don't go everywhere and we need them to, right? That speaks to that hypocrisy. And when the folks that we elected, right, don't show up in ways that align with the values that clearly the public is expressing, right, their districts are expressing, that also speaks to that hypocrisy. So one of the suggestions that, Ryan put into place and mentioned was like running for office yourself, right? Anyone can do it. You're over 18, get engaged in the process. Also vote, right? Which we're about to switch gears to, talking about this upcoming election. And let's actually talk about what's happening in these races and what's happening right now. Again, redistricting is here, right? We have this huge new map, and I'll make sure that the link to this map is posted in the Facebook Live, as well as posted in the comments for folks who are tuned in over the webinar, and so folks can see exactly who is going to potentially be representing them in the new districts that they live in. Because folks, you should know this because you have an election coming up. Let's keep on going. We have a bunch of elections that are happening this year. We just went through one of them. We went through the spring primary, February 15th, in which we voted for a few. If there was a county supervisor's race with more than 2 people in it, folks had the opportunity to vote for county supervisor. Other than that, we were voting for our mayor, right? We had several candidates running for mayor, and now it's down to the 2, Chevy Johnson and Bob Donovan. And we have another election coming up April 5th to make the final decision, right? That we'll have to deal with the combination for over the next 2 years for both of those seats, right? For the mayor, right? There'll be another election in 2024. And same for the county board, the entire county board, right? Which means that as it relates to our parks, as it relates to public transportation, as it relates to our seniors, as it relates to our zoo, our natural amenities like the domes, and then a whole span of other issues, including housing, which Ryan Clancy authored a pretty cool piece of legislation that I'm gonna ask him to speak to. We have the opportunity to elect folks who align with our values in this election cycle, and we'll have another opportunity in 2024 to really get these levels of government on track in an effort to long-term build a more transformative democracy. Understanding that our representative democracy does not always work and align with our values. So there's a few other elections. The fall primary, August 11th, right? And the general, November 6th, right? Those 2 elections are gonna be, there's gonna be so many things on your ballot. It'll be way too many things to count. From the governor to the lieutenant governor to the entire state assembly to one state senator in our region, that's Chris Larson, to our U.S. Senate race, which has already been going on for a while, even though it's pretty early. But all of those issues, right, will affect how much money will be coming into our county government and how much money will be coming into our city government to deal with issues like our streets, our parks again, our seniors, and so many other issues that are directly affecting your lives. Let's go to the next slide. Nope, it's freezing up on me. For the information you need for these races, right? For all your voting needs, you can go to myvote.wisconsin.gov, right? On that website, you can register to receive an absentee vote ballot. You can register to vote. You can also see where you are voting, because polling locations have changed for some. You can also register to vote, and you can track where your ballot is if you are voting by absentee, right? So Is it on its way to come to you? Did the election commission receive it, right? Because I know a lot of people are worried about if their vote actually ends up counting if they vote absentee. You can see the whole process from receiving your ballot to the election commission actually processing it on this website. And then also for early voting information, you can go to the city of Milwaukee's website and type in and go to the election information, and you can see every early voting site in the city of Milwaukee. This again will help in the process of making a decision related to who represents us. And I still encourage folks to engage in this process, even if the candidates that are in the mix, or whether that's the county or the mayor's race, aren't the folks that you are really interested in. You should still know their platform, and you should still know where they stand on a lot of the issues that you care about, because at the end of the day, one of those people will be making decisions as it relates to your life, right? And you should be able to hold them accountable, and you should be knowing what they stand for and what they don't stand for, and how you can hold them accountable. Let's keep on moving. The last thing we have is an ask for you, right? An ask for everyone who is tuning in over Facebook Live, who is in our webinar, right? Please get to know your county supervisor, right? We took the opportunity to go to findourcountysupervisor.com. These are the people who are representing you right now for about 3 more weeks. Some of them will stay the same, but a lot of them will change. But you should know what these people stand for. When you go to this website and you search, you put in your information, all you need to know is your address. It will show you the email of your county supervisor. Our ask for you is to email them. Send them a short email. Hi, my name is, blank, right? For example, hi, my name is Darrin Madison. I'm emailing you, Priscilla Coggs, to know about, what are your legislative priorities for 2022 to 2024 if reelected, right? How do you engage and share information with us, right? The community. And then how does the county plan to invest this second half of ARPA dollars, right? We at every level of government have been dealing with this huge piece of money called the America Rescue Plan Act. And a lot of those governments have spent their first half of that money. We have, put out information on our Facebook page about how the city in particular has been spending its ARPA dollars. But we need to know, right? It is important that the public knows how these ARPA dollars are being invested, especially in our communities, right? As opposed to invested in, businesses that don't align with our values, and results in, us living in the same conditions that we are living in right now, right? I want the freedom to thrive in my city, in my county, and in my state. But that all is contingent on how the folks who I elect show up and show out. And this pot of money, which is literally millions of dollars, will have a huge economic impact on the city, regardless of if it's used in a positive way or a negative way. So as you send out those emails to your elected officials, please CC me, Darrin at the African American Roundtable.org. And so I can just be a part of the conversation too. And that's what it looks like, the first step in taking action as it relates to our county government. We are definitely going to be asking folks to do more things as things come up, because there's so many ways that you can take action alongside our organization. From coming with us to Canvas, we're beginning our canvassing efforts. March 19th, specifically related to educating folks about the county and this mayoral's race, and building community with them on the Northwest side. And then we are also going to be doing things like launching our membership program and a thing called our Northwest Side Action Council. So if you live on the northwest side, please hit us up, and we can bring you into that bucket of work, specifically the Northwest Side Action Council. But membership and our canvases are things that we will be things that you can get engaged in, regardless of where you live. So that is our ask for you, and we'll close this out by inviting you to ask us any more questions that you have as it relates to county government, or the work that specifically that the roundtable is doing. And I'd be, again, I've said this a lot, I'd be remiss to mention, we are also having our second undoing the hypocrisy of our democracy session, March 24th, where we will be having a conversation with Mayor Marvin Pratt about our city government and what it means to be a mayor in the city of Milwaukee. So please ask any questions you may have. No.
So I'm seeing one question about just updating on the county's ARPA process. And yes, I'd love to. So in fact, back at the end of the summer, I sit on the finance committee. I got our finance committee to agree. This is while the city was fighting about how much ARPA money to give to the police. I got our county finance committee to commit to not giving a single dollar of ARPA funds to law enforcement. I did that in exchange for my vote to create the ARPA task force. The ARPA task force is kind of a standalone committee. It's chaired by Sean Rolland, and they consider ideas for ARPA funds. They will then eventually bring those, I think, via finance to the full board. Not all the ARPA funds have been spent. Some have been kind of claimed tentatively. In fact, in the same full board meeting, that my colleagues said that $1 million was far too much to provide free calling for everybody in our care for a year. We took 10% of those ARPA funds and earmarked them towards unspecified technology products or projects. And in fact, we gave tens of thousands of dollars to them just to come up with what those projects would be. So I was against that because I knew that other departments would start doing the same thing and kind of calling dibs on these ARPA dollars. I'd much rather look at specific projects than categories. But there is a robust process going on now. They met just this morning, and they meet fairly frequently. If you have ideas for projects for ARPA dollars, you can submit those through. I'll provide the link to you, Darrin, so you can maybe add that to the notes afterwards. But there is a way to get those in and to get those considered by the ARPA task force.
Awesome. I will make sure that that is posted in the event page. Any other questions? All right. If not, we are going to call it wraps.
Well, I gotta say thank you first before you go, both to you, Darrin, and to Devin and Marquesa, and to the ART generally. Your work is so vital, and there's absolutely no way that we would have been able to take a single dollar away from the sheriff's budget or do a lot of our other work without the fierce advocacy of AART and other partners. So thank you so much for that. I'm very grateful.
Awesome. Yeah, no, Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you as both a county supervisor and in this space with us right now, because there is, again, a lot of work that needs to happen in our county government. And you are one of the folks who are truly fighting for things that especially Black and brown folks want and need. And you show up in a way for your community that that aligns with our organizational values. And that's especially, that's especially appreciated because commonly with elected officials, right, there's a lot of folks who are in positions of power that don't align with our values, right? So to have someone like you that does speaks to progress in our work and speaks to progress in our communities.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And thank you for holding me and us accountable. So appreciate it.
All right. So everyone have a good evening. A lot of the key points of information will be put in the event page for folks to refer back to. And thank you again for tuning in with us. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.